Good to go?
You go, Carl.
Okay, thank you. So why don't we go ahead and call tonight's meeting of the Board of Ed Finance Committee to order. It's about 6:02. We have 3 board members here, and we can go straight into, we've got a packed agenda tonight, so we're gonna kind of skip along, starting with the minutes from our May 12th meeting, which were sent out. Folks had a chance to take a look. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from May? Thank you, Diana. Suzanne, do you second? Seconded. Do we have any corrections, comments, changes?
I didn't see any.
I did not see any either. Taking a last quick look right now. Suzanne, are you all good?
She's on mute. She said something.
Sorry, there was just one minor thing. I think
Oh, yeah.
on page 4, it said, and I wrote down page 4, full paragraph 3. It said correct fun instead of fund.
Good catch. Full paragraph 3. Yep, correct fund from SR2. Good catch. Thank you.
And the same thing, I think on page 3, on the first line, it's missing a T in first. Oh, I must have been a principal in my past life.
See, I thought that was talking about trees. No, great catches. Thank you, Suzanne. Great. If there are no other corrections, do we have a motion to approve the minutes with those 2 amendments?
So moved.
So moved. Seconded by Diana. Great. All in favor? Thank you. Excellent. Unanimous. And a shout out to Telesco Services, who takes such great minutes for us.
Oh, and it looks like Laurie from Telesco.
Tom's on mute.
Okay, I just admitted Laura from Telesco, so I guess she wasn't here for the opening, but she can catch up, I think, with the recording in any event. So
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just praising you, Laura, and Telesco for taking great minutes, so thank you.
Thank you. Sorry I was late.
No problem. Okay, so item number 3 on the agenda is an action to authorize the superintendent to execute a contract amendment to extend the food services management company contract with Chartwells for 2021-22. This was always intended as a multi-year contract. It just needs to be renewed actively every year. I don't know if there's any additional information we need to know about that, Tom. Nothing's changing.
That's correct. It's a pretty standard contract renewal. The expectation when we put out the RFP was hopefully that we will have the firm in here for a 5-year period, but the state actually requires that we execute an annual contract amendment. So they won't permit just the district to enter into a 5-year contract. We can only enter into successive 1-year contracts, but we are, quite pleased with the services that Chartwells has been providing us. One of the things that has been really encouraging as a result of the change in the federal policy, as you know, when the pandemic hit, the federal government essentially made school meals free of charge for all students. And that continued for both the last few months of last school year, and it's continued for the entire school year this year. And recently the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture that administers the school lunch program, announced that it was going to continue with that program for all of next school year as well. And that is really terrific news for us for several reasons. One, it means that our kids, who, some of whom really need those meals, will not have to pay for them next year. And it also has important financial implications for the district. One of the things we've found during this past year is that the district, which historically, the food service operation had historically run at a financial loss, that for this year, we're now projecting that it will be a break even or better operation for the year that's ending in a few weeks. So that's really great news all around. Chartwell's has really been a leader for us in terms of making food available, and they've been very creative in coming up with new ways to distribute meals to students and to children throughout Norwalk. And they've been a really excellent partner for the district. And so we're very eager to continue our relationship with Chartwell's. We provided backup in the agenda package. The fee that we pay them is really relatively modest as a percentage of the total food service operation. We spend and receive revenue that totals about $5.5 or $6 million a year. And you can see that the management fee is just under $80,000 for next year, and the administrative fee is just under $112,000. So we think this is really good value for the district, and so we strongly recommend its approval.
Thank you, Tom. And I do want to commend, personally, but also on behalf of the board, the way that Chartwell was able to help us manage food delivery during remote learning, during hybrid, on some very challenging scheduled days. The only thing I would say, and perhaps just for the record, but to get this conversation going, is that we also have gotten some feedback that there may be room to have more healthy food options for some of the kids. It's come up in a couple public comments, and I just wanted to note that as something that has come up. So,
yeah, and obviously we've noted that as well, and I know that the food service team is working on that as well.
Fantastic. Okay, well that works for me.
Did you? Oh, by the way, did you want me to share the agenda while we're going through this, or we do have a PowerPoint when we get to the budget that I will definitely share, but I can, if it's helpful, I can put up the agenda.
I think let's just wait until we get to the PowerPoint. If it's okay, we can see each other's faces. In the meantime, I will read each other agenda item when we get to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, though. Are you good to go ahead with the Chartwell's contracts, Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm glad, Colin. Thank you for mentioning the public comments that we've heard. I think that's important, just to keep the conversation going, be sure that we're watching all of those things. But kudos, it sounds like they're doing a good job during a really difficult time.
Absolutely. Okay. On that note, is there a motion to authorize or to move this to the full board next Tuesday to authorize this contract with Chartwell's?
Aye.
Okay, and seconded. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you so much. That takes us to our review of proposed revisions to the district purchasing policy. And Tom will give us some more background on this. I don't know that if we need to take any action tonight. It may go through the policy committee, but because it deals with purchasing, which goes through finance, I think it was helpful to have it on the agenda tonight. So, and this is partly in response to an audit that was done a few years ago, Tom?
It was actually the audit that came out in December, this last December, December 2020, is when the auditors, presented their management comments. And this was one of the management comments that the auditors made. And it was actually a comment that they made relative both to the city of Norwalk and to the Norwalk public schools. And what the auditors essentially found was that the existing policies that both of our organizations have in place were not updated to incorporate some federal changes that are referred to as the uniform procurement standards. And these uniform procurement standards have a number of requirements in them. And so you'll see that the documentation that we've provided you takes our purchasing policy from what is a few paragraphs to 10 pages. But these are important things and certainly, things that we want to adhere to. As you had indicated, it's my understanding the board policies have to go through the policy committee, and there's a whole procedure for doing that. Obviously, at this point, we're at the end of June, or we're at the last meeting before the end of the school year. So I'd suggested in my memo that this be referred to the policy committee in September for consideration and action. But I want to be able to tell the auditors that our board, at least the finance committee, has reviewed this and discussed it and passed it on, hopefully, to the policy committee for formal action. And Karen Bartron is on the call here. I don't know, Karen, do you not have access to a camera? Because I'm assuming you're there, but
I'm here. I thought I had a camera.
well,
I've done this before.
we don't see you, but Karen was instrumental in
Oh, here we go.
drafting these new policies, and I want to acknowledge her hard work on this and give her an opportunity to talk about them as well. As my and I'll turn it over to you in a moment, Karen. My cover memo pointed out that there's really two things that we're asking the board to consider here with this request. One is to make some adjustments to the bid thresholds that are in our current board policy. And the current board policy has not been updated since 1995. So it's been quite a long time since it was last updated. And what we're requesting is to raise the lower the limitation or the limit for when the district is required to solicit quotations from $3,500 to $10,000. And $10,000 is consistent with the, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's consistent with the current city purchasing policy, and it's consistent with what you found other school districts in Connecticut are doing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And we see that I did a lot of research behind this and contacted a lot of other districts, and we see that the districts that didn't change their policies or update their policies have these lower limits, and yet the state, sometime after between 1995 and now, increased their thresholds as well. So I mean, it's been quite a long time since we've looked at this.
And then the other thing so the quote threshold would go from $3,500 to $10,000, and then the formal bid or formal RFP threshold would go from $7,500 up to $20,000. So anything under $20,000, we would be soliciting informal quotes for. Anything over $20,000, we would be issuing a bid or an RFP. And so that was sort of the first half of this recommendation. And then the second half of the recommendation was the 10 pages of documentation, and this is really taken more or less verbatim from the federal standards. So we decided rather than trying to, modify it and capture the essence of it, we would just take it essentially verbatim from the federal standards. So just to sort of hit a few of the highlights, well, actually, why don't I let you, Karen? Why don't you, if you're prepared and want to talk about some of the highlights here, why don't I let you do that if you could?
I think, when Tom and I were talking about these changes or changes that we're calling out in our policy, I told him I wasn't too concerned about most of them because most of them are just good purchasing practices that we're already following. So, we don't accept gifts. We don't, allow people who have special interests to participate in the procurement process. We're already doing most of these things. There were a couple of things that did concern me. We do allow, currently we allow, or we've worked with contractors and providers that can provide specifications for us. Say we're redoing a library or something like that, and we actually have them scope everything out for us. But when Tom and I talked about how to accommodate that moving forward, we thought we could use a bid process or procurement process that would allow different suppliers to provide that design concept as well. So we think we know how to accommodate all of these changes, and I don't think it's going to be too difficult.
Yeah, so on that point, the point of the federal regulation is they want to make sure that you are providing fair and open competition, essentially, to any business that we are putting out for public bid. And so they don't want you going to a single supplier and having that single supplier then sort of write your bid specs for you, and that would then potentially allow that vendor to tailor them so that they are the ones who are best able to meet those specs. So what we need to do is we can take information and gather information from multiple vendors, but we ultimately have to write the spec ourselves. We can't just sort of take somebody else's spec and put our name on the top of it. So that's the one of the key elements in this federal procurement, these federal procurement guidelines. And Karen, anything else in there that you wanted to draw attention to?
We're already, as I said, we're already doing a lot of these things. Just to inform you all of what's been the progress we've been making in purchasing. We've gone to an electronic bid software program where our suppliers can submit bids electronically. We can produce them and post them electronically. And what happens is the vendors sign up for certain categories, and then they get automatic notification. So a lot of this stuff, they talk about having an evaluation system. We already have that in place for all of our bids. We put the criteria, actually publish it in the bid so that our suppliers will know how they're going to be graded and scored and everything. And we just realized in the last few weeks that with our Bonfire platform, which is our purchasing platform, our electronic platform, we can, it automatically converts those statistics into a table for us. So we can evaluate all of this stuff online. We don't have to do it in person. People can do it individually. We can do it in groups. All of this stuff is very helpful, but we have all of that in place already.
And that system will also help us meet the requirement that you have to maintain complete documentation on your bid process. So, you need to have, need to maintain the rating sheets that you go through, and you need to maintain the scores that each of the bidders was, awarded by the selection panel, and so on and so forth. So that online system really will help facilitate all of this. The other thing that we did recently, earlier, I believe it was in early April, there was a principals meeting, and we had an opportunity to present to the principals on these new procurement guidelines, and to discuss with them again what the thresholds are for bidding, and to talk about various component or various elements of these federal guidelines, including the prohibition on conflicts of interest, and to sort of just drive that point home, and to really make sure that our principals understand these procurement guidelines as well. One other thing, which is part of the federal guidelines, which is something we may want to explore further as in the coming months, is that the federal guidelines do have a provision in there related to contracting with small and minority businesses, women-owned enterprises, and labor surplus area firms. And the verbiage here is on page 9 of these guidelines, where it says the Norwalk Board of Education shall take all necessary affirmative steps to assure that minority businesses, women business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible. And then it goes on to describe some of the affirmative steps that we need to make sure we're taking. And it certainly occurs to me as the issue of equity for the board has grown in importance. This is certainly consistent with that effort. So some of the things that we can do, for instance, is to look at what we're putting out to bid, and if it's feasible and economically feasible, to sort of break things into smaller increments or smaller tasks, so that we can get some smaller firms potentially bidding on district work. That would be one strategy that we might try to employ to help increase the participation among smaller businesses. And usually that what we find is that minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses do tend to be smaller because they're newer to the marketplace and not as established. And so we want to look to see what we can do to make sure that we're providing as much open and fair competition as we can.
And Tom, we also, I reached out to the state on that issue to see what programs that they have. And we currently publish all of our information. All of our bids are published at the state website as well. And they have special programs to encourage small and minority owned businesses. So we're hitting it in that area as well.
Right. And then one of the other thing that the policy talks about is making sure that we aren't putting on unnecessary onerous requirements, excessive bonding requirements, for instance, sometimes are looked at as a real impediment to small businesses. And so, there are cases where you need a performance bond if it's a very large construction contract, but there are many other cases where a performance bond really is not necessary. And so, that's a third area that strategy we can use to help make our efforts more successful there.
Oh, I wanted to mention value engineering because that's in there as well. And that's something that we typically do. So if we have a project, we will often, as a matter of fact, we issued a bid request today for boiler work at Fox Run and exhaust reconstruction at Brian McMahon. And we actually asked for several different levels of responses so that we can pick and choose depending on the cost of the project. We can add things or delete things, and we typically do that on a regular basis.
Okay, so again, as we started out, I guess we're not really looking to move this on to the board?
Well, what I
because-
would suggest, and by the way, thank you, Tom and Karen, for that, really thorough walkthrough. It's really great to hear how, these federal guidelines are helping us to sort of, add a little bit more structure to our purchasing, and the fact that we're already doing a lot of it anyway. I assume that, or I hope that they'll be doing something similar on the city side. I would suggest that maybe because this involves purchasing, that we as a finance committee can vote to approve it, to recommend it to our policy committee colleagues. And because it's relatively straightforward, they may not need to go through the whole 3-month process. They may be able to move it forward next month or the month after that.
Well, I have a question. I'm on policy, so I don't think that I can approve to move it forward.
You can abstain.
That leaves only 2 of you. Is that okay?
We have a quorum, so we can take a vote. Yes, if that's okay with you, Suzanne, I'll make that motion, and you can second it,
I second it.
and we can both vote in favor if that's something. Yeah,
Yay.
just to show that we were able to
Yep.
kind of have a review of it today and can recommend it to our policy colleagues. And again, thank you so much, Karen.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So moving right along, the next item in the agenda is to authorize the superintendent to execute a contract with Evergreen Solutions LLC to conduct a joint city/NPS operations and efficiency study. This is something that really first came up in conversation around this time last year, as we were going through the budget negotiations with the city. At the time, the then superintendent suggested, at the time, some of our colleagues on the Common Council suggested doing this efficiency study, and the then superintendent suggested that we make it not just on the school district side, but across the entire city. And so after months of review and vendor discussion using the same system, Bonfire, the company that the committee selected was Evergreen Solutions, and as part of the discussions, it was made explicitly clear that this is a joint study. It is being done with 2 clients, City of Norwalk, City Hall, and Norwalk Public Schools. It's just going to be done concurrently by the same company. So this action item gives us the opportunity, the option of authorizing the superintendent to enter into that contract. Did I miss anything out there?
No, I think that pretty well summarized it. It's a joint study with a joint contract, so it would be, the contract itself would need to be executed by both the Mayor Rilling on behalf of the city and the superintendent on behalf of the school system. And we're asking, that the board authorize the superintendent to sign that contract.
We have a motion to move that forward. Diana, thank you. Suzanne seconds. Any further discussion about that contract?
This is from the past. One time in the past, we did something like this and the results were never published. No one ever knew anything about it. So I'm just encouraging that this really be a transparent process when the results are done and the recommendations are done, that we all have a chance to consider it and do what's right for the city and for kids, because I don't know that's always happened in the past. So it's a new day, so things could be different, but I want to just encourage that it's done to the fruition, and then actions are made based on the recommendations.
Absolutely. I second that emotion. And I do believe that is the full intent here. And I think we have, it is a new day. So
Good.
If there's no further discussion, all in favor of authorizing the superintendent to enter this contract? 1, 2, 3. Good for me. Thank you. Okay. You were chugging along, Tom. You thought this was going
Yeah,
to be
you
a
know, I
meeting.
thought this meeting was going to go on for hours, but
This group is efficient.
yes, very efficient.
We
group.
read our notes.
Okay.
So that moves us to the next item, which is to authorize the superintendent to execute a lease agreement with Human Services Council, Inc. to lease property located at 1 Park Street, Norwalk, for purposes of establishing an NPS Family Center. And this is something that we have talked about at this committee before. This was an initiative that our new superintendent talked about very early in her tenure. And has done a lot of explaining of why it's important to have a centralized location for families to be able to navigate the school system. One of the things I like to say is that as we talk a lot about our initiatives around equity, equity can sometimes be a vague term. People are like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I think it's really good to give concrete examples like this one. This is something that exists in a very uneven way across school buildings. And so having these family coordinators to help families navigate the full gamut, and we know there's a lot that falls through the cracks of going through the school system, I think is very important. And this lease agreement, and Tom can tell us a bit more of the detail, gives us an opportunity to move ahead until we can get the full capital improvement to purchase property, which we did not get this year. So I'm very pleased that this offers a way for us to move forward and really offer these services until we can do something in a more sort of permanent way. Anything to add to that?
Sure, great. So, I think you summarized it really well. We have been in discussions with the Human Services Council for a couple of months now over potentially leasing space at their building, which is located just down the street here from City Hall at 1 Park Street. And we've toured the building multiple times and have had our facilities team over there, and the superintendent, of course, has been there. And we're convinced that this really can serve as a really ideal spot for this district family center. And the family center, we've taken the name Family Welcome Center out of it, not because it's not going to be a welcoming place, but we already have a welcome center, which will be, located in this family center. And we didn't want there to be some confusion, because really the family center encompasses the welcome center, but it's really a whole lot more than that as well. It's really serving all of our families and all of the needs that our families have. So it becomes really a one-stop shop for central registration. It becomes a one-stop shop for specialized learning and accessing specialized learning services, accessing information and guidance and help on transportation issues, accessing services for our multilingual learners, centralizing our school choice options, which right now are very decentralized. Many parents may not know about them at all, and each school sort of conducts its own, lottery or mechanism to attract, students into their school. So, we think there's really great advantage to centralizing these services, food services, student health services, a technology depot, student records, working with volunteers, and having a place for volunteer groups that work with our schools to to gather and having space for all of the other organizations that help support our schools, a space for them as well. So we think this is really very much needed, and this will greatly advance the school district's efforts to serve our families. Now, we are very close to having a lease term sheet available, and I hope that it will be available to send out with the board packet on Friday. But I can walk you through, and we're still, just finalizing a couple of the details, if you will. But we know that the base rent would be based on a fee of $17 per square foot, and that would be a gross rental figure, meaning it would incorporate all of the expenses associated with utilities and repairs and maintenance and sewer use charges and water charges and trash removal and snow removal. So it's a gross lease at $17 a square foot, which is a very attractive rate. The issue that we're just still sort of nailing down is exactly the amount of square footage that the district will be taking, because there are some existing tenants in the property that are using a portion of the property. So it's likely that we will have an initial square footage figure, which they then will likely increase when that other space becomes available. So at this point, the initial lease figure appears to be the number we're coming up with is 10,733 square feet, and the final figure after the current existing tenants are no longer in there would be 14,836 square feet. So the rental rate would then start out at about $15,200 a month and end up at just over $21,000 a month. We have identified grant funding from the ESSER II grant that will be available to cover these lease expenses. The term of the lease is being set at a 1-year term with the opportunity for renewals, and we would expect to renew it, but it would be a 1-year lease with renewals. Let's see, other major terms. There is some capital work that needs to take place that will be ultimately contracted for by the landlord, but the district will reimburse the landlord based on a schedule that is laid out in the term sheet. So there's some painting, carpeting, removing one wall on the 3rd floor, and doing some ADA improvements to the bathrooms on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors. So we would expect to then reimburse the landlord for those capital expenses based on a schedule that's set out in the lease. We will have the right to bring in subtenants if we identify that there's space that's available and we have a partner to the district. We will be able to bring in subtenants, and I think those are really the major provisions of the lease term, and we're very close to getting this term sheet finalized, and our intention is to put that with this board action item going out for the board meeting next week. So we're really excited about this. This is a major new initiative for the district, and one that we think is very much in line with the goals and objectives that are laid out in the new strategic operating plan. And so we're really pleased to be able to bring this forward at this time.
Fantastic.
I'd also like to add that including all the services that it's going to be at the center, I think the timing is perfect because after this pandemic and everybody, coming back to school and hopefully all being in person, I know that a lot of families, especially new ones, even current families, have lots of questions how things are going to work. They're going to need help. So having it centralized during this time is perfect timing. And thank you for all the work. And I've had, I did walk the property with facilities. It's a beautiful building. It's nice and spacious, and everybody's going to fit in. And I like the fact that we will have partnerships with other companies and things that they'll be able to come in and support the families and children as well as just Norwalk Public Schools. So I look forward to this.
I think that's a great point, Diana, and I think that's part of why we can use some of the ESSER funding for it, because it's absolutely is part of the mitigation strategies for some of the catch up we're going to do after COVID. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there the potential, although it may not be in the term sheet, to actually purchase the property eventually?
Yeah, I mean, that is not laid out in the term sheet. We don't, that would be subject to future negotiation, but it's something that, we would certainly want to put on as a, as a possibility, certainly in the future as we go forward, that if we're going to, maintain the center long term, I think that would be a wise move ultimately to take. This year certainly will give us an opportunity to try it out and see how it works. And if it works as successfully as we think it's going to, and as we expect it's going to, then, looking at a future purchase certainly is something that I think the district would be interested if everything works out. Now, a purchase it does require city, not only city authorization, the purchase actually has to be made by the city. The Board of Education as a entity does not own, we do not have the right to buy and own property for school districts, unless you're a regional school district, and then it's a different case. Then the regional school district actually owns their school buildings. But in Connecticut, when a school district is, a single city school district, it's actually the municipality that owns the property. And so a decision to buy the property, if that were to be made, would need to be made by the city and executed by the city.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I think, in light of any capital improvements that we make to the site, especially, and the fact that it's really well located in a central and accessible place, hopefully that would be taken into consideration. Okay, any other comments or questions? In that case, do we have a motion to authorize this lease? We're going to move it on to the board. Diana, thank you. Seconded by Suzanne. All in favor? Excellent. Great. Fingers crossed. I have a good feeling about it. Okay. Going on to item number 7, authorize the superintendent to approve fiscal year 2020-21 year-end budget transfers in excess of $10,000, subject to providing the board with notification of all such transfers. This, I believe, is something we do annually to help clean up budget line items at the end of the year, so that we're not waiting on the board to approve every transfer over $10,000.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The board is taking this action every year, and this is really just to help us get the books closed as quickly as possible. We do have a very tight deadline because the state mandates that we have to file what's known as the EFS, which is our year-end financial report, by the end of August. And so that means we really have to have the books hard. There has to be a hard close on the books by, at the very latest, really middle of August in order for us to compile that report and get it all into the state system in time to meet that deadline. And so in order to do that, we have to get these budget transfers that are year-end cleanup transfers processed really in the month of July. And so unless the board were going to come back and meet in July, this is, we think, the best way to handle it. We will bring all the transfers that are greater than $10,000 back to the Finance Committee. Typically, we bring those back either in August, if you have an August meeting, or in September, so that you have an opportunity to review all of those transfers.
Sounds good to me. I don't need anything else. Suzanne, Diana? Okay. Motion to authorize the superintendent to approve transfers in excess of $10,000. Thank you, Suzanne. Seconded by Diana. All in favor? Fantastic. Okay, now we come to the meat.
Okay.
Fiscal year 2021-22 operating budget reconciliation and approval. After many months of back and forth, here's where we land. Take it away, Tom and Kristen.
Okay, I'm looking for my presentation. Let me get that up first. I guess that's it. Okay. Oh, sorry. And I guess the presentation, I should have put this on presentation mode before I shared it, probably, huh? Well, I guess it's okay. Can you,
I can see it.
all see it?
Yep.
We can see it.
No,
Okay.
it's fine. It's good.
Okay. I want to, first acknowledge and thank Kristen Karschmidt for all of her hard work, along with Nina Laria, and really the whole finance team has been working very diligently on the operating budget. There isn't necessarily a lot of public discussion, but we are very busy behind the scenes working with all of our school building leaders, with our principals and other school staff on each of the individual school budgets. We've been meeting over the last 6 weeks, multiple meetings with the school leaders, and we now have completed that process, and we've reconciled back to the final budget that the city approved. And we're here tonight really to just talk about the reconciled city budget. And so in terms of overview, as you're aware, the city decided to provide a 0% budget increase to the Board of Education for next year, basically because of the ESSER 3 grant that is being made available to the district. And so as we discussed at previous Finance Committee meetings, our budget is really going up at more than 0%. We are going to simply be shifting some expenses, $6.9 million of expenses that are in the local budget will be shifting over to the ESSER 3 grant for next year. And unlike most of our other, or all of our other federal and state grants, which typically have what's known as a non-supplantation requirement, meaning we're not allowed to supplant what is already being done with local funds and to have it be picked up by grant funds. In the case of the ESSER grants, ESSER 1, 2, and 3, there was no non-supplantation requirement. And so therefore we can move expenses that are qualified expenses out of the local budget and into the grant budget. And that's what we will be doing with respect to $6.9 million of expenses. So just to kind of ground everyone, where are we overall in the budget? There were a couple of really significant drivers in the budget, and where we landed was the Board of Ed budget is effectively increasing by 3.8% or $7.9 million. And we've got another slide on this that describes this in a little more detail. But really the two major things that are driving our budget for next year are contractual increases under settled labor contracts, 2.7% increase for teachers, paraeducators, administrators, custodians, nurses, and other staff. And then the increase in health insurance that we talked about, which is less than we had originally projected, but is still 17.9%. Representing 4.6 million increase over last year. And that's both a relatively small increase in the actual rates themselves, but then a fairly significant impact from the fact that we previously in the 2021 year were drawing down the last portion of the insurance fund. And so that funding is no longer available to support our health insurance costs for next year, and so it needs to be made up for next year. The third major sort of driver as we were putting this budget together was really to address the issue of the need to mitigate learning loss as a result of the pandemic. And so you will see, and Kristen's going to go into quite a bit more detail, that we have repurposed existing positions and funded new positions at all levels, really, at all levels, to provide additional support to our students and additional support to our teachers so that they can help mitigate learning loss for our students. And so this support is really consisting of reading and writing and math improvement teachers at the middle and elementary school levels, and literacy and math coaches at all school levels. And again, there's multiple funding sources here, and some of the items that are presently being listed as funded in the local budget, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but some of those items will encompass a portion of the 6.9 million that we will ultimately need to move over to ESSER 3 in order to meet this 0% budget increase. So the way that we, well, let me stop there and just hit the next bullet point and go on to the next slide. But the point that we've made at previous finance committee meetings, we're going to make again, and that is that the city's decision to zero fund our budget and essentially direct the district to use its ESSER 3 grant to make up the difference has a downside to it. And that downside is that it is creating a cliff that at the end of the relief period, when the ESSER funding is no longer available, a number of those expenses are really ongoing expenses that will need to be put back in the local budget. And so what that will mean is that the year that happens, we will have a larger than normal increase in our budget. And it won't be anyone's fault that it won't be because of anything we've done wrong. It's simply a mathematical fact that if we move ongoing expenses that historically have been funded in the local operating budget and move them temporarily to a grant funded source, and that grant funded source goes away, then when we move them back, it will cause a larger than normal budget increase in the year that we have to move them back. So the next slide is a walkthrough of sort of the budget that we presented to the city. And this number up here, this 218 million, was the revised budget This was the budget that the board, revised budget the board approved in February after we found we were able to take a couple $1 million out of the health insurance account from our original request. And so that brought our request down to 9.6 million increase, which was a 4.6% increase overall compared to the original budget for this year. Now, what we, in the subsequent period since February, we did identify some items that we were able to move to existing and ongoing grants, 200,000 and another 1,595,000 that we are able to move to the PSD grant and to the Alliance District grant. And we are expecting the Alliance District grant to go up. So we have some additional money there, which we expect to be ongoing. And so that really is sort of a permanent move of items out of the local budget into grants budget and into the grants budget. And then that leaves us with a net Board of Ed budget, local budget of 216,275,000, which is the 3.8% increase I referred to earlier. So that's why we're suggesting or saying that the real or effective increase in the budget for the Board of Education is 3.8% for next year. And then what you see here, these are two items that were shifted over to both the ESSER 2 grant and the ESSER 3 grant. The 885,000, we had identified that before the city set the final budget as a means of trying to get our budget down as close to 3% as we could get, because that's where we believed perhaps the city might be, amenable to a 3% budget increase. But then when it was dropped to a 0% budget increase, in order to hit that 0% number, we needed to shift an additional $6.9 million over to the ESSER 3 grant. So Kristen, you want to jump in on this one? I think you were going to talk on this slide, right?
Sure. So these are numbers that you just saw from the slide that Tom just went through. And if you look here, the first box just shows you the details that help us reconcile to the 3.8% budget. The first line item, the reduction of 100,000. I think everyone has seen that before, but it's a change in the adult education contract. So it's just a budget revision that saved 100,000, and then a shift in one of the technology positions to the IDEA grant, 75,000 for the actual position, 25 for the benefits. Those three items give us $200,000 reduction in the budget that's already been taken. As Tom spoke to, the 1.6 million is a TBD situation because we're going to shift expenditures from the local budget to ongoing grants such as PSD, but we can't make that determination yet until we also lay out the whole picture, which is what else we're shifting to the ESSER 3 and other grants, because we have to be very strategic and make sure we put the right pieces into the right grants and look at the supplanting and non-supplanting rules and make sure we hit the category, check the boxes for what we want to do there. So right now it's a plug. Both the 6.9 million and the 1.6 million are plugs in the budget, and that's the next step. We have ideas on that, but we have to map the whole thing out together. So we can't give you the details on that at this moment. Moving to the second box, the details.
Let me just, Kristen,
Sure.
Let me just jump in there for a moment, because we do have a slide coming up later where we will talk about, in general terms, some of the items that we will be looking to move over, but we don't have a itemized list to present to you at this point because of the fact that there's still additional work to be done. As Kristen said, it's really a bit of a jigsaw puzzle for us, because these existing grants that we're talking about here on this 1,595,000 do have a non-supplanting clause attached to them. Okay. So we will have to find items that don't represent supplanting that we're moving to PSD. And so it may be more items that are non-personnel related, for instance, might be easier to move here. But we really need to sit with Sandra Fayos and probably some other people on the district team to determine, to kind of put this jigsaw puzzle together and to figure out what precise pieces go where. But we will be talking in some general terms on the types of items that we're looking at. So I'm sorry.
Right. So we have discussed the categories and we have a really good idea of what we're going to move. We just have to make sure we move the right pieces into the correct grant. And then plan out, future projections on what the impact will be. So we have done that work, but not in a line item detail at this point. And if we move to the second box, we see the details that are included to get us to the 0% budget, where we are now tying out. And there were some math improvement teachers currently budgeted and originally budgeted in the local budget. If we move those to the ESSER 2 grant, or we have moved those to the ESSER 2 grant with the benefits, that's about 700,000. An analytics developer or specialist, we've moved the salary and benefits for that into the ESSER 2 grant, that's around 100. And then the help desk vacancy that was needed at a minimum, to say the least, we've moved those salaries and benefits as well into the ESSER 2 grant, and that's about 75,000. So those items right there have been moved into the ESSER 2 grant, totaling 885,000. And then there's the $6.9 million funding that we will be moving into ESSER 3.
Okay, so the next 3 slides are not our work product ourselves, but in fact came from a toolkit that an organization called Chiefs for Change has made available to districts nationwide. And so I modified it slightly in one place, but I thought it provided a nice high-level summary of the 3 ESSER grants, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, and lays out this slide here simply lays out the time frame during which expenditures can be charged to these 3 grants. They all go back to the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. And you see ESSER 1 is funds can be spent through September of 2022. We have largely spent most of the ESSER 1 funds. They were spent really on, those were the initial funds spent to buy Chromebooks for students and to buy hotspots and to deal with some of the initial expenses of moving to distance or remote learning and some reopening. ESSER 2 is funding that can be used up through September of 2023. That money became available earlier this spring. The district submitted an application to the state, and I believe it was in April, and that includes a number of expenses related to the reopening and the cost we incurred for safely reopening schools in the fall and reopening in a hybrid environment in the fall and operating during the 2021 school year. And then ESSER 3, which is the ARP, American Relief Plan Act funding. Those funds can be used up through September of 2024. The state just recently released guidance on this particular grant. This was the act that the Congress passed, I believe, in March of this year, 2021. And those funds are really intended for long-term recovery, accelerating learning, and mitigating learning loss, and looking at sort of systemic improvements of how to make our education system more effective and resilient in the long term. And that's the largest of the pots of money. So the next slide, probably hard to read online here, but I threw in the Norwalk Public School allocation on the top line here. So you see the 2,084,000 under ESSER 1, 11,047,000 under ESSER 2, and 24.8 million under ESSER 3. And this again provides a summary of what the federal government intended those funds to be used for, and the various provisions of them. I think it does indicate that there is a, so on the ESSER 3 funds, you can see there is a requirement that 20% of the funds must be used specifically for learning loss activity. And much of the way that we're planning to spend them will in fact be learning loss. I don't think we're going to have any trouble meeting that 20% threshold. There is a maintenance of equity requirement, not a maintenance of effort, but a maintenance of equity requirement in ESSER 3. Here is the supplant issue, supplement, not supplant rule in effect. And unlike pretty much every other grant, federal or state, the ESSER grants did not have a non-supplant rule, which is why we're able to move $6.9 million of expense into that ESSER 3 grant. And the other thing that the ESSER 3 requires is a publicly available reopening plan, and we've already reopened. So, this was based on national legislation, and Connecticut and Norwalk in particular were well ahead of where many other states and school districts were in terms of reopening. So the focus from the State Department of Education is really about the continuity of services and how we're going to maintain that continuity of services, since most school districts in Connecticut now are reopened. And this
sorry
yes.
to interrupt you, Tom. I apologize, but I am extra booked this evening, and I thought we might be able to be done with our meeting right now. So I do have to leave this meeting, but I wanted to say for the record that one, I'm grateful that we are able to fall back on the ESSER 3 funding for this budget, but two, I reiterate and underscore what we have been saying, which is that these funds will run out, and we're going to run into a local funding cliff. So in advance, I'm going to voice my approval for moving this budget forward, and I apologize that I have to leave early. I have asked Diana to chair the meeting in my absence.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so I'll keep going. And so ESSER 3 of the final slide from the Chiefs for Change toolkit is this description of allowable uses of what the funds can be used for. And so you see here, of course, addressing learning loss and accelerating progress to close learning gaps is listed as number 1. Activities to address the unique needs of low-income children, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and foster care youth is high priority. Professional development, technology services and programming, and then all other programs essentially that are authorized under a variety of different federal grants, including ESEA, IDA, Adult Ed, and the Perkins Grant. You can also use the fund for community engagement and coordination, comprehensive planning services. You can use it for systems improvement, data systems, strategies for public health, and continuity of services. And you can use them for a variety of expenses related to COVID safety, so sanitation, tech and learning tools, facility repairs, air conditioning inspections and upgrades. So all of those are allowable uses for ESSER funds.
I just have a quick question here. Are you at all concerned, Tom and Kristen, about having to stay at a zero budget, using up so much of the money that if there's a need for some kind of hybrid model, at least to start the year, that we won't have funds to do that?
I mean, I think there'll be enough money to cover our needs for next year. I'm concerned about the year after that, and certainly the year after that,
Yeah.
absolutely. But even beyond 1 year, I'm concerned that that cliff may come sooner than we all think it's going to come.
Mhm.
You know, especially if we have significant expenses, as you suggest, if we have to continue with social distancing practices and having additional staff to cover these auxiliary teaching and learning spaces that we had this year, that came with some quite additional cost, as well as all of the sanitization and air quality expenses. So there were just a whole lot of different expenses that we incurred this year. And if we need to continue to incur those expenses next year, it would have to come out of the ESSER 3 grant, and that would be a concern, because it's going to mean that ESSER 3 grant is going to get used up sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Right,
So-
and in our base budget, we have assumed that, you know, the ongoing COVID is not there anymore, and the mitigation strategies are being funded out of ESSER, in addition to the 3.8% that's moving to ESSER. So that is a concern, to Tom's point and your point.
You know, I mean, because no one has a crystal ball, right? You read about the how these things have morphed and what can happen, and you hope for the best, and it's, you know, but
Right.
it puts you in a fiscally, you're forced to be in a fiscally maybe precarious situation because of how we have to use our ESSER 3 funds in other places. So
Right. I mean, I think everyone is feeling this sense of relief right now, and certainly, you know, things look like they're really going in a positive direction in this country. But there's other places in the world where variants are, you know, really wreaking havoc, and we don't know what when a variant may come, you know, pop up, that all of a sudden if the vaccine is not effective against that variant, we could be back in a situation that we thought we weren't going to see again. So,
Right.
So Kristen, you want to take this slide, and what this slide is really our attempt to identify for you those items that we have funded at least partially in the local operating budget that we will be looking to move to the ESSER 3 to make up that 6.9 million. So this is where we don't have line by line account number itemization for you, but these are the types of things that we're looking at and areas that we're have identified as items that are likely could be funded under ESSER 3, and we know that we have some dollars in the local budget in some of these areas. Some of them are split funded already, where you've got some money in the local budget and some money in grants. So Kristen, why don't you talk about these a little more?
Sure. So these are, as Thomas said, the NPS focus areas. Some items, as we discussed before, and you'll see in additional slides, are already in the ESSER 2 grant, and we'll talk about that in more detail, but the ESSER 3 grant is part of the jigsaw puzzle, if you will, and some of the big areas are obviously social and emotional learning, and through this, we want to add or have added in the local budget social workers, additional school counselors. We've added additional funding in the local budget for special education that could potentially be moved over to ESSER 3. It would fit that category. A big area that's a focus area is enhanced summer school programs. So we were just reviewing financials and budgets for the enhancements that we're doing to summer school. Some of it's in the local, some of it is in other grants, but we may need to shift between multiple grants and local budgets in order to give the summer school programs that we need and roll that out. There's always technology needs. We probably won't be spending as much on technology to address the digital divide because we were able to spend money we've already had to do that. So I think there'll be money spent there, but not as big as some of these other buckets. The biggest area is going to be we won't have trouble spending the 20% of the grant to address learning loss. Right now, we've laid out tier 2 interventions through reading, writing improvement teachers, math improvement teachers, and we have staff professional learning through literacy coaches and math coaches. The improvement teachers are working directly with the students, whereas the coaches are working with other teachers who work directly with the students. That's the big differentiation there. And you'll see in an upcoming slide some more details of how many are repurposed or added and what funding source we're currently at. So we'll talk about what school levels are getting each of those and how it's being paid for currently and what could be shifted over to grant funding. A big piece of the grant will also be spent on family engagement through attendance facilitators. The attendance facilitators are really working with families directly to address chronic absenteeism. So they're kind of the liaison between the family and the school. And at this point, there are 10 of them added to the budget, and 2 are at the elementary school level, 4 at the middle school level, and 4 at the high school level, because obviously the higher grades have a bigger problem, especially in our remote learning situation and where we are with everything. And then, as Tom had talked about earlier in one of our other bullet points on the agenda, the NPS Family Center is going to take up some of this funding.
Okay. And I
So
think
the grant relief funding expenditures that, just to recap and tag along to the chart that Tom was referring to before, we have the CRF, Coronavirus Relief Fund. This was really a reopening and reimbursement grant. This is, since it's a reimbursement grant, we are still uploading and asking for reimbursable items to the state. They've extended the reimbursement period till September. So we're hopeful, we're almost at the $5 million point right now that we've claimed and are in the process of getting revenue for, 4.9 million. And we think that maybe we can submit for another 300,000 to 400,000. And this covered items for summer school from last year, paraeducators, learning pods, teachers, nursing, you know, all the methods we had for social distancing in the schools, the Jefferson Annex, food service items, special education evaluations, SEL positions, air filtration was a big item here, cleaning, security and safety measures, and in a lot of facilities expenditures. Probably we're going to be working with auditors and some other internal people to report out what we had claimed. But at this point, that's what it consists of, and we're around the $5 million mark. The ESSER 1 grant, which was the academic support for our current Title I schools, We've recently changed our Title I methodology, but that was worth a little over $2 million. And what we had spent it on was reimbursement for Chromebooks that the city initially purchased, and we reimbursed them for over $700,000. Summer school for $400,000. The Jefferson Annex building in order to have social distancing. We had to staff that building accordingly, like you would a regular school. So additional or incremental salary and benefits there were $200,000. They needed security, cleaning, that was $34,000. The utilities, regular building being open, over $300,000. PPE, which, you know, when we reopened schools and ran this year, we needed to purchase the PPE for $140,000 and other technology needs for $250,000. The ESSER II grant, which was $11 million. I think Tom talked about the priorities there, which were really academic supports, family and community connections, SEL, and other areas. This was really supporting the math and reading, writing improvement teachers for $7 million. I just wanted to note that some of these positions we're discussing and we're talking about aren't necessarily new or incremental positions. Some of them were new and some of them were repurposed and reposted in order to fit into this category where people were, you know, doing the job in a streamlined fashion and lining up with the grant in the way they were supposed to do. So I don't want everyone to think we're adding, you know, 50 or 70 positions. Some of these are a restructuring of current positions, and, you know, they were posted and all the proper procedures were followed. The 10 attendance facilitators, that is new, and that is to address the chronic absenteeism, as I've noted before, for $1.5 million. Technology staffing, obviously when you're going digital and everything's more on a digital scale, you need to add staffing there. That was $400,000. The biggest area of ESSER II is the family engagement and mitigation of learning loss for $1.4 million. Some security expenditures, technology devices and software, that's an additional $350,000. And then air filtration, as the year goes by, we need to add or replace the filters of the HEPA filters and some other filtration we've already put into the school.
Okay, was I going to take this one, Kristen? I don't remember.
I could take it and you can jump in,
Okay.
if you want.
Sure.
So all the way, the second column to the right, you'll see the 21-22 approved budget, we're calling it, as we're talking to you tonight. That's the $208,468,385. That's our 0% budget. It's slightly over the original budget by $52,000. So actually we got a $52,000 increase versus our original 2021 budget. But just to some broad strokes on what's driving the variances are the salary account, which is the 100 series. That's wages. It's not only salaries, it's stipends and other you know, certified hourly, overtime, or anything in that nature all goes into that bucket. But really the driver of the $4.5 million is the contractual wage increases, as we've discussed before. On the second line, we've split out the 150 category, which is the holding account, as we call it. It's the plug of items that we are gonna map out and move to the grants, the ESSER and the other grants, as we've discussed before. We have the big categories. We just need to actually move the line items after we've reviewed the entire picture. And that's 7.3 million. That consists mainly of that 6.9 million we discussed earlier on the reconciliation sheet. The employee benefits, or the 200 category series, is up by 5.5 million. And that is driven by 4.6 million in health insurance. Unemployment's up versus original budget, about $500,000. And then some other minor items like Social Security, retirement, and other benefits. But the big driver there is the health insurance, as you've seen. The 300 series is professional and technical outsourced services. And the drivers there need really have to do with the food service deficit that used to be in the original budget, which now Tom had talked about that earlier, due to federal guidelines and reimbursement, we're assuming no food service deficit. So that was around 400 or so in the original budget. And then also the rest of the difference is really a sprinkling throughout, and it has to do with we're not buying as many textbooks or consumables because we are moving to a more digital facing school. So, you know, we may be increasing in the area of software and some other areas, but really it's a sprinkling of supplies, digital, because we are more digital. The 400 series is the property and facilities. That relates to, that increase relates to the outsourcing of custodians at a few different schools, mainly. And other services, the 500 account, sorry, I lost my place there. This decrease of 1.2 million really directly relates to a decrease in the special education budget or the out of district tuition. And that's because we're bringing students back in district because we have created robust programs where they can come back in, the next step programs, etc., as well as a few students are aging out or graduating. So all for positive reasons. Where are we? The 600, there's not, you know, the next three categories, supplies, equipment, and other. The variances aren't very high there. And I think it's just a sprinkling as well with a decrease in supplies mainly across a few different budgets.
I do want to point out, because we've heard people suggest that the Board of Ed never ever reduces any budget or reduces any line items in its budget. And you can see a number of these accounts in total are going down by, you know, 1.2 million, 1.9 million, 361,000, 236,000. So obviously there are in fact places where the board is reducing spending compared to prior years. So I just wanted to make that point. And this is really just a graphical representation of how our money is spent. We're a very people-intensive business. So most of it's in salary and employee benefits. That's, you know, 75% or more of our total spending. And the other pieces are relatively minor. Other services, transportation, and is probably the next biggest item. So, and health insurance. This is just the detailed calculation of how we arrive at our health insurance budget. In total, the health insurance budget general fund contribution is going up by this $4.6 million. And so it's partly because of an increase in claim costs, which is an increase in rates and an increase in the number of insured bodies that we're covering. And that translates into a 7.7% increase. And then the rest of it going from 7.7 to 17% is really the loss of this 2,750,000 here. So this was the drawdown of the balance in the insurance fund. So it was making use of that final insurance fund piece. And so the good thing about that is that, you know, should not be or will not be a recurring issue for us. So the following year, I would expect our health insurance increase should be much more modest. But this is the calculation of how we arrive at you know, our numbers. Okay, Kristen's going to talk about the process of working with the schools and the principals a bit. Suzanne probably has some recollection of this, but
They were all fond. They're all fond.
Yes.
It's come a long way over the last few years. So actually, being on Teams and Zoom has helped the process tremendously, believe it or not, because all different people are able to jump in and out of the call, stay for the whole thing. We're able to share screens, actually work on the budget document live, share other information, pull up Munis. So it's actually perfect. And then when we finish everything, we actually can tie out, everyone can see it, and we look at the roster together. It's great. So really, who attends these meetings? This is the bulk of the budget. So this is really important. We just don't make pie in the sky. We actually go through every detail of every school budget. We have the principal there. Some principals will bring a CISD or the assistant principal or other people. We have myself, Tom from the finance area, as well as Tori Walker. She was a huge piece of the SBB process because she would actually have Munis up and make changes in our budgeting module. So we can run rosters, and we have job class codes changed and actual people changed. So she was a huge help as part of this process. Thank you, Tori. Human resources, there was always a human resources partner on the call. So that way, if we had any new questions about new positions or excising or bumping or rates or creating new job class codes or anything, they were addressed on the spot, which was nice. And we were able to look in AppleTrack, Munis, check people's personnel records. So it was very helpful to have people from HR there, especially Erin was there for most of the meetings. We had some chiefs coming in and out from special education and other areas. So that was really helpful to get input from those people. We had school improvement and grant support on the calls because really it's not just a local budget review. The school is affected by Title I, PSD, now the ESSER grants. So it's really one big jigsaw puzzle. We have to look at the whole picture. You can't really budget for your entire school. And then once we were done with the budget and everything tied out and they balanced to their per pupil, they would bring it to their SGC for approval and review before and after. So at this point, myself and Tom were getting emails from all of the schools saying, yes, our SGC approved this, reviewed it, approved it, everybody's happy. And here's the official approval. So I'd say 95% of the schools are at that point. There's still a few people who are doing their meetings probably this week. The SBB process, just to make everyone aware, is we would review the roster. So every single person in position at the school level. And we would recommend the appropriate changes with curriculum's help, talents guidance. In the local budget, we budget based on average salaries. So people budget what they need and not based on seniority, due to having different salary levels. But in grants, we must budget on actuals. We look at our stipends and compare them to the contract to make sure they're in alignment. We review non-wage expenditures and look at what the school requires versus what they've spent in the past, what they think they're going to spend in the future, and what they really need for their school. So people do make a lot of changes, and this really empowers the principal to give the school what they need and customize the budget to their school community. We recently restructured the magnet funding process, and we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, but we allocate the magnet funds appropriately in line with the committee's allocation. We reserve 0.5% of the enrollment or of the budget for enrollment influxes. Previous years it was 1%, so some of the cut we took in this current budget was to this enrollment fluctuation reserve instead of cutting other things. So that was helpful, but it still does give a buffer in case enrollment increases in the fall versus the demographer's projections. And then we do also review other non-local staff rosters, such as central office, special education, and other grant rosters. So people from those specialty areas pop in and out of the meeting. And then once they're balanced, we give the approval to post any vacancies. So the good thing is people have posted, I'd say 95% of the vacancies or more at this point in time. Okay. You could go to the next
Sorry, I
slide.
forgot I was in charge of the slides.
Ah. So I'm just going to give an SBB recap by school level, elementary, middle, and high school. So in the elementary school in this budget, we were able to fund Montessori slots at Brookside and add a new Montessori classroom. So that had happened. We also, I don't know if anyone knows this or remembers, but each local school budget funds or pays for a percentage of their CISD, and the Alliance District grant pays for the other portion. So we were able to retain that model or that split. And we were also able to increase CISDs to a 12-month position, which the incremental increase was funded by the Alliance grant. We also take a look at and adhere to the number of sections required to stay within the class size guidelines for the contract. And at the elementary school level, all schools have added a math and reading writing improvement teacher through the grant. So that is really important and was a district priority and initiative. At the middle school level, same thing. All schools have added a math and reading writing improvement teacher, one at a minimum. And another change just to note was middle schools still follow the house model. For the 21-22 school year, there are 2 houses at Nathan Hale and Roten and 3 houses for West Rocks and Ponus Middle School. One positive point was the superintendent wanted to restore the middle school sports allocations to previous levels of $40,000 per school. So that had been cut in half at one point, and we did restore that because she thought that was very important. Then at the high school level, P-TECH and Norwalk High, in combination with Norwalk High and CGS, in combination with Brian McMahon, continue to build out their own direct teachers at these individual schools. So as they grow their enrollment and develop their programs, they're able to hire their own direct teachers. Although there are still teacher splits where, for example, some of the P-TECH students are attending some Norwalk High classes, and the same thing with CGS students attending Brian McMahon classes. But we do have an allocation methodology of department expenditures and staff expenditures between the 2 shared schools when that does occur, since they do get their own per pupils now at this point. And at the high school level, classes are aligned with the program of study, and we require at a minimum a 15 student minimum to run each class. At all levels, as I just indicated, we reserved 0.5% of the budget, excluding the magnet, in order to address enrollment fluctuations versus projections. We've added the attendance facilitators, as we spoke about earlier, and all schools have added a math coach, with the exception of CGS and Brian McMahon. They're actually sharing a math coach just because of the needs between the 2 schools. And then West Rocks, in lieu of a math coach, elected to hire 3 math improvement teachers, 1 per grade, instead who will split their duties to include a portion of the role coaching teachers and a portion working with students. They got special permission to do that, and they were able to do that because of Title I funding as well. All schools have added a literacy coach with the exception of CGS due to their test scores and some other areas that were above state average. They were not required to add a literacy coach. And then West Rocks, the same thing with the reading, writing improvement teachers. As the math improvement teachers, they were able to hire 3 in lieu of doing the literacy coach. So we're just going to talk about next Tier 2 interventions to deliver focused and targeted intervention through the new reading and math positions. So here you can see, it's just a chart broken up by local, grant, and then the total of the two, just to give you a higher level view of where we've added teachers. And like I said, the corner grand total 72 this represents, that doesn't mean we added 72 incremental positions. It just means there's 72 of these tier 2 type positions. And we've either shut down other positions, restructured positions, and added a few in order to come up to the 72, but they are by no means incremental positions added to the budget. So if you look in the first section, you see the literacy coaches. At the elementary level, we've added a total all the way to the right, you can see, of 12. So each elementary school has gotten that. Middle school has added 3. Like I said, West Rocks did not add a coach. They added the improvement teachers. And then at the high school level, at 3 as well, because CGS did not need it. So some of this is just a visual of all the numbers, so you can see, reference point of local, grant, and total and how it shook out, but really it aligns to what I was saying on the previous slide. And then you can see in the local budget for literacy coaches, there's 9 funded there and 9 funded out of the grant.
So one point I would just make is when we do sort of sit down to complete this jigsaw puzzle and figure out what were the, what exactly of the 6.9 million that's currently in the local budget are we going to move to the ESSER 3 grant, there's a good chance that the $1.9 million that you see here and the salary for the 21 positions and the benefits for those folks are probably going to be, this will probably be one of the items that we determine this can move to ESSER 3 because it's certainly in line with the intended use of those funds. And so right now they're in local, or this portion are in local, but when all is said and done, when we start the year, we'll probably have moved them over to ESSER 3 at that point.
That's correct, Tom. So that is part of our jigsaw puzzle. And that amount only represents the salary portion. There's a benefit impact too on top of that. So that could be, another $500,000 just in that area. Do you want to talk to this, Tom, or do you want me to?
Magnet, yeah. So Magnet, as you'll remember, in order to fund these other initiatives, the literacy and math initiatives we've been talking about, the superintendent did determine that we needed to take a new look at the Magnet programs and the way that we're funding them. Previously, they were funded really automatically on a per student allocation basis of an additional $1,000 per student. And what we indicated at the time was we felt that it presented really equity concerns because the schools that had achieved a Magnet status and were getting that additional $1,000 per student really had more resources than schools that didn't have that same designation. And it wasn't always clear that the full $1,000 per student was necessarily really needed in order to run that Magnet program. So what we looked at and the board approved as part of the budget that you approved back in January was to decrease the Magnet allocation district-wide from 2.5 million down to just over 1 million. And that was, again, so we could fund literacy and math specialists. And then we said we would put in place an application process and a scoring process, a rating process to evaluate what each Magnet program truly needed. And so we did that. We developed an application, and all the existing Magnet schools completed that application. We had a committee that was formed that reviewed all the applications, and had prepared a rubric that was based directly on the questions that each of the schools was required to answer as part of that application. And so what you see here on the next slide is the results of of this new process. And these numbers have been, of course, shared with all of the principals, and the principals have used these new numbers as part of the final reconciled budget. So the budget that's before you now incorporates these magnet program allocations that total $1,050,000. And you can see they range from 275,000 for the PTEC program down to, I guess on the low end, it looks like 25,000 for the Marine Science Academy at Brian McMahon. Or I'm sorry, it looks like the IB career related program is the lowest at 15,000. So no one received 100% of what they were looking for, but I do think that the process was ultimately successful, that the schools were able to balance their budgets. They were able to continue all of these existing programs. So the only one that was a new request was the middle years program, and that was the only item that wasn't, well, that was that and the Wolf Pit Arts Magnet were the two items that were not funded. With respect to Wolf Pit Arts Magnet, the board has not yet actually designated Wolf Pit as a arts magnet school. And we felt that the committee felt that it was premature to allocate them a magnet allocation. We are working with Wolf Pit to see if there are any grants that we can make available so they can continue down the path, we think, of developing an arts magnet program. And perhaps this will be something that the board takes up in the next school year to look at whether or not we want to make Wolf Pit or designate it formally as an arts magnet. I think there's generally support in the administration for the concept. The district ideally would like to have a arts magnet program at one of our elementary schools. And so we're certainly supportive of the concept and are going to be working with the Wolf Pit school community to advance that over the course of the coming year, both by potentially bringing it forward for discussion with the board if you want to make that a formal magnet school, and also working with the Wolf Pit school community to determine whether or not we can secure some grant funds to help them along that path. The IB middle years program, I think, is something that is also in sort of the discussion phase at this point and is not rolled out formally. It hasn't been designated as I understand it, and it did not. They're not currently receiving magnet funding, but again, that would be consistent with the prior discussion about building out a larger pathway, IB pathway. So I think that certainly is still on the table for future discussion. And I don't know, Kristen, was there anything else on this that you wanted to highlight as far as the magnet allocations?
I guess the only point is, I think you brought up the funding was cut in half. So although we would have liked to give everybody more funding, the reality is it was cut in half, and the committee did the best they could fairly allocating that.
I mean, I think the good news out of this is that all of these magnet programs that we currently have in place will continue, and no one is going to have to sort of fold up shop because there wasn't magnet funding available. So, okay. And I think we're coming to the end of our slides. This is just a one slide snapshot of our enrollment, and the demographer has projected that our enrollment is going to rebound next year as we come out of the pandemic and as students return. We know that for the current school year, that COVID caused many parents of kindergarten age children to hold them out of school. And so we're expecting a influx of kindergarten students next year. And we know that a number of parents chose to homeschool, and we think a number of those parents will be coming back. And so we believe that we will see a rebound in enrollment, and that's what this budget is predicated upon. I don't know if there's any questions on enrollment. If not, I think the rest is really appendix. Do you want to just talk quickly about any of these items, Kristen?
It's just a reference, just to put out there that we're transparent in our funding. The per pupil at each level was distributed as such, as you'll see here, and we use a base per pupil amount. We multiply that by the enrollment per the demographer, and then we add on top of that magnet funding and any other adjustments. But if we do make an adjustment, we lay it all out so we're transparent and everybody knows where all the dollars are coming from. In this instance, P-TECH, we adjusted their enrollment per the demographer. For some reason, they were coming up with 393, but really in reality, we already know the student counts on grades 9 through 12. So we made that adjustment there. And then CGS also gets grant funding. So we just illustrated that so you can see the total budget with the grant funds. And then on middle school, you can see the after school sports that was layered on top of that. The per pupil on middle school was 8784, and that's multiplied by the enrollment. And then finally on the last slide, the elementary is 8539 times the enrollment, and then overlaid on top of that is the magnet funding as allocated on the other slide. Oh, and then Columbus actually gets a hybrid per pupil funding because they have elementary in a sliver of middle school students at their school. They get a prorated amount between elementary and middle school per pupil because of different requirements at those school levels.
Okay, so I think that concludes our budget presentation. Before I stop sharing the screen, are there any questions from board members?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for such a detailed explanation. I also wanted to let the public know that even though we don't have questions right now, we've been looking at this budget for quite some time and we've been asking lots of questions. So if we're a little silent, it's because we understand what we're looking at and we're just getting updates. Suzanne, do you have any questions for them?
No, I don't have any questions. I just want to reiterate what you said again, very thorough, really detailed. And the jigsaw puzzle is still to be finished, but you clearly have laid the foundation for that happening. And I know the amount of time, effort, energy, sweat, and potentially some arguing that went on. And so kudos, as always, to the finance department.
Yes, especially with all the hours and weekends and holidays that you put in. You're constantly maneuvering and playing with that jigsaw puzzle and turning it inside out, upside down, trying to do the best for the children of Norwalk. So moving forward, Colin has left. He did make a motion, his first motion, and he did vote to approve to move this over to the full board. So I'm asking Suzanne, second it. Okay, so all in favor to moving this to the full board? Okay, so that's unanimous with all three. Our next item on the agenda is the 2020-21 budget transfers.
Right. So Kristen, you want to take these? You've been doing a lot of talking. I apologize.
Sure, no worries. Did you want to
Drink lots
share
of
them?
water.
What? I know
Drink
myself there.
lots of water.
You want me to share them?
Yeah, that'd be great. That it's probably easier for people to look at them.
Okay, hold on. Hmm. And it's this one. Okay. Oh, no, I'm on the wrong place. There we go.
There you
Now
go.
let me see if I can figure out how to
Make it a little bigger.
a little bigger.
There you go.
Um,
So the first transfers for 60,000, it's transferring funds from transportation into the intern account, which is housed in the HR department. And the reason we had savings in transportation was because less buses were running because of COVID. The second transfer is 91,264, moving it from a teacher line into an instructional equipment line at Merrimack School. There was a vacancy that was covered by a substitute, so there was savings in that account compared to what a normal salary would cost. The next line is 25,000, moving it from other professional services to the travel account in the facilities department. The next transfer is 15,000, moving it from the 330 account to the general supplies account in facilities. And then the next handful of transfers are also facilities department, and they're really just maneuvering. You've probably seen this the last few meetings, maneuvering funding from certain areas to other areas in the electricity and oil and gas accounts. And that's because we used to just budget everything in facilities 60 main account, and we're just massaging the numbers there where the expenditures are really popping up. So they're not necessarily incremental expenditures, they're just moving it between locations. And it's a budget versus an actual shifting of funds. If you go down to, let's see, where it says 85,953, we're shifting funds to cover instructional equipment needs, ViewSonics, document equipment, and other upgrades at Norwalk High. We are also transferring 20,000 into instructional supplies at Norwalk High from a few different accounts, a few different other minor accounts. The next one is 115,000 coming from two accounts into one instructional supply account in the curriculum department in order to support the LIT camp curriculum. The next entry is 110,992, and this is shifting funds from a 124 account to a 400 account due to custodial staff being outsourced at the Marvin School. On the next page, you'll see a number of accounts in the HR department where, minor surpluses were, and we shifted that into the unemployment account for 132,000. And there's just increased unemployment related to COVID and some job shifting that was happening there. The next one, what is 66,627, a social worker at vacancy, or not even a vacancy, sorry, a social worker. It's an account correction, moving it to a psychologist account. For some reason, the wrong account code was used. So it's not a change in position, it's just accounting change. The next one has to do with West Rock social studies vacancy that couldn't be filled. They couldn't find the right person, so they're moving that money into non-instructional equipment in order to purchase 21st century furniture for classrooms. And these students were just combined with another classroom, and it was at the limit, so it was fine. The next one is 23,000 and a few other accounts moving from other professional services, textbooks, other textbooks into supplies account for the Jefferson School, and it's just consolidating everything to purchase the supplies they needed to close out the year. The next account is Columbus, and it's moving their 1% reserve funding of 27,991 into an instructional equipment account in order to purchase the equipment for the new media lab. The next account is $50,000, moving it from a teacher vacancy, which had a sub in there as well, into the instructional supplies account. And this was to buy supplies for the guided reading materials for Cranberry School. The next one is instructional equipment, 18,743, moving that money into a non-instructional equipment account for a tractor for custodians at Norwalk High. And then the last one on here was a $102,000 shift from an aid account to a repairs and maintenance and instructional equipment account. The para was actually funded out of the PSD grant, and it was to cover the cost of technology for the new makerspace furniture at the Brookside School.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. I don't know if there's any questions on the transfers before I go on to the financial report.
No questions on my end.
No questions.
Okay, so we're coming down toward the end of the agenda. The financial report, we've provided you the May financial report. And obviously we're coming up to the close of the fiscal year. There's a lot of activity that's going on right now. And so it really changes on a daily basis. When I pulled the numbers today, they were actually about $7 million higher than the numbers that were pulled here for the end of May. So there is, a lot of activity that's going on. We're 91% of the way through the fiscal year and 90% of the way through the school year at the end of May. And we've expended about 78% of the budget. It looks on the surface like we're underspending the budget, but there's some important things that you have to keep in mind. One is that our wages always look like we're underspending wages because of the fact that many of our 10-month employees, many of our teachers elect to get paid over a 12-month period because for their own personal budgeting purposes, they would rather get paychecks spread out over 12 months, even though the pay that they're being paid was actually earned over the 10 months from September to June. So that they will get paid out in July and August for work that they already finished, in the previous school year. And that payout, if you will, the summer pays, totals something in excess of $10 million. So it's a very sizable amount of money that we're talking about. So that reflects the actual expenses at this point during the year. There's also during the month of June a number of activities that are taking place in terms of June professional development, summer school prep work, curriculum writing work sometimes, so that some of those items also are sort of backloaded in the year. And then finally, we also have some unsettled labor contracts. As of right now, we have the NFEP contract that is still unsettled, the custodians contract that is unsettled, and the food services contract that is unsettled. And all of those we will need to, there may be settlements that may occur between now and June 30th. And if not, then we would need to reserve funds to cover any expected increase. So the most recent projections that we've performed on our wage accounts suggest that we're going to be quite close to our overall adjusted budget on wages. We're expecting to underspend that budget by somewhere between $250,000 and $450,000, which would equate to a 0.35% unexpended amount. So spending, roughly, more than 99.5% of our wages on the year is what we're projecting. In the non-wage accounts, we are projecting at this point, after assuming the purchase of some additional literacy and social studies curriculum materials that I believe that this will be coming to the curriculum committee next week. After assuming those purchases, right now we're projecting a turn back perhaps in the magnitude of approximately $400,000 to $500,000. So we are expecting to be really very close overall on our budget, for a budget of over $200 million. That is very close, but we do expect to end the year within budget. In terms of specific line items, I don't want to belabor it because really I've just given you sort of the high level of where we think we're going to end. But we're looking at some of the areas that, for instance, the fringe benefit account is showing only 68% expended, but this is really a contribution that the city controller pulls from our fringe benefit line that gets made to the insurance fund periodically, and there's the last portion of it will get pulled on June 30th. So even though it's showing only 68% expended, we know that that line item will be fully drawn down at the end of the year. Some of the areas where we expect some turn back that will cover overages in other areas, the 330 account is one area where we believe we've got some turn back expected in this area. Some of that is related to special education savings. The other area where we've got some turn back, which again will be used to cover expenses in other areas, is in student transportation, because of the fact that the district is transporting fewer students in this pandemic year. We are going to save a fairly substantial amount of money in transportation expenses, but again, we expect that money will be needed in other areas, primarily in curriculum areas. And then the other area where we've got some turn back that we've talked about previously is in special education out-of-district tuition. And again, that's a reflection of the fact that we have fewer students who are outplaced. We're providing more services to students in district, and that's saving us money in out-of-district tuition. So that's really the highlights on the financial report for May. I don't know if there's any questions.
Looks good.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop sharing.
Well,
And
once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know it's been a tough couple of years, and like I said, the timing and your expertise is greatly appreciated. And I know that you put a lot of hard work into all of this. So thank you. It's been a long night. I know you guys have worked a full day. I don't have any public comments. None were emailed. So Roland, do you have anyone waiting?
Not that I can see, it's just us.
Okay. Well, thank you. Motion to adjourn then. It's been a long night.
So moved.
Good night, everybody, and thank you for everything.
Thank you so much.
thank you. Have a good rest of
Bye-bye.
your night.
You too. Bye. Go have
Bye.
dinner.